welcome to the debate. Imagine a worker who finishes all their critical tasks by 1 p.m.
But they stay glued to their desk, right? Just furiously typing away at, well, nothing until 6 p.m.
Exactly. Just to make sure the boss physically sees them occupying a chair. For, the better part of a century, we call that dedication. But today, we're recognizing it for what it actually is, a massive waste of human potential.
Right, but let's flip it. Imagine that exact same worker at home. They finish their tasks at 1 p.m., close the laptop, and completely miss the massive afternoon crisis where a colleague desperately needed their institutional knowledge to, save a client account.
Ah, the missed conversation.
Yeah. That physical absence, it isn't just a missed chat. It's a fracture in the structural integrity of the entire team.
And right there, that is the fundamental clash we are unpacking today. We're looking at how modern organizations actually optimize human productivity, connection, and, well-being, because the architecture of work has fundamentally fractured.
It really has.
And we're exploring this entirely through the lens of our core material, the battle between remote work models and traditional office culture. Is a future of human endeavor best served by the autonomy and, the strictly output-driven model of remote freedom? Or is it fundamentally anchored to the physical proximity and spontaneous connection of traditional office culture? I'll be arguing that the remote model is a necessary evolution toward autonomy and actual measurable output.
And I will be making the case that physical proximity remains completely irreplaceable for authentic culture and, innovation. I'm incredibly glad we're diving into this because it is easily the most consequential sociological shift in modern organizational design. We aren't just talking about where we put our laptops.
Right, no.
We're talking about how humans actually collaborate.
Exactly. Let's start with a baseline shift here. From my perspective, the remote work revolution did something long overdue. It completely destroyed the illusion of time spent at a desk and replaced it with actual measurable output. For decades, we conflated physical presence with productivity. Remote freedom dismantles that. And by shifting the metric to output, it unlocks these profound lifestyle advantages. We're talking about eliminating the commute. The commute isn't just a loss of time. It is a massive, uncompensated cognitive drain.
I mean, no one loves a commute, sure.
Right. But when you strip that away, employees can build what we call hyper-focus zones. These are environments entirely customized to minimize the standard, constant interruptions of an open-plan office. Furthermore, it democratizes geography. It untethers people from hyper-expensive city centers, completely changing how and where human life can flourish.
I hear the appeal of that autonomy. I really do. But I come at it from a completely different angle.
Okay.
The core of my position is that authentic organizational culture, the actual tissue that holds an enterprise together during a crisis, it cannot be replicated through project management software or, asynchronous video updates or digital dashboards. Physical proximity isn't a relic. It is an irreplaceable engine.
An engine for what exactly?
For innovation. Because the human brain requires friction to innovate. It requires spontaneous, organic brainstorming. Physical proximity accelerates passive mentorship for newer employees who learn the unspoken grammar of their profession simply by being in the room. And crucially, that togetherness maintains unified alignment. You can mandate a deliverable from afar, but you cannot mandate culture through a screen.
But this brings us to a really fascinating tension. If we are fundamentally separated or fundamentally together, how are we measuring value? It really comes down to how we define professional trust. Let's dig into that mechanism.
Let's do it.
The remote trust model relies entirely on output, documented results, and asynchronous communication. I would argue this is vastly superior because it strips away the optics.
The optics.
Yeah, the optics of work. If trust is based purely on what you actually produce, remote work is the most honest system we've ever designed. It completely erases geographic barriers, meaning you can access the absolute best performers on the globe, and they prove their worth through pure, unadulterated execution.
Well, that's a compelling argument on paper,
But have you considered what happens when the work itself isn't easily quantifiable in a neat little dashboard?
How do you mean?
Well, an office culture relies on physical presence precisely because proximity builds a much deeper, more resilient kind of organizational trust. Trust isn't just a transactional ledger of, did you submit the code or did you file the legal brief? It is built through fluid, nonverbal communication.
Huh?
It's the micro-interactions. It's reading the room, seeing a colleague physically struggling with a concept at their desk, and walking over to help before they even have to ask. Without that proximity, teams are incredibly susceptible to cultural drift. Trust becomes purely transactional, and when trust is transactional, loyalty evaporates entirely.
I see why you think physical presence builds that kind of trust, but let me give you a different perspective. Is what you call unified alignment actually just a euphemism for conformity?
I wouldn't call it conformity.
But consider this. Whereas remote work democratizes opportunity by strictly measuring what actually gets done, office visibility often mutates into a theatrical performance of work. We have to acknowledge the psychological phenomenon of presenteeism.
Right, the person looking stressed at their desk.
Exactly. The person who stays at their desk until 7 p.m. looking highly stressed gets perceived as a hard worker, even if they spent 3 hours chatting in the break room and 2 hours browsing the internet. People spend 20% of their cognitive energy just managing the optics of looking busy. Remote work strips away the theater. You either did the work or you didn't.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that it's all theater. You're assuming that measuring what actually gets done is a perfectly objective science.
Because the output is tangible.
But in modern knowledge work, output is highly collaborative, messy, and nonlinear. The theater of work, as you dismiss it, is sometimes just human beings coexisting in a shared mission. Visibility isn't about surveillance, it's about availability and shared reality.
Okay, but
Let me just finish this thought. When I can see my team, I know the temperature of the room. I know when we need to pivot. When a remote worker vanishes for 6 hours to execute a task, yes, they might produce a technically perfect widget. But if the strategic goals of the company shifted during those 6 hours because of a sudden market change, they are now completely out of alignment.
But the data explicitly shows that communication in remote environments is highly deliberate and documented precisely to prevent that.
Is it though?
Yes, because you aren't relying on the accidental temperature of the room. You actually have to write down your strategic shifts. You have to document your decisions. It forces a rigor in leadership that the office environment often covers up with casual conversations that inadvertently exclude half the team. Remote trust is earned through transparency of process. You don't have to guess if someone is aligned. It's documented.
Documentation is vital, I agree. But documentation is always looking in the rear view mirror. It captures what has already been decided. It completely fails to capture the nuance of how we decide. And that brings us to a massive vulnerability in the purely output-driven model.
Which is?
If we're only judging trust by the final output submitted on a screen, we are completely ignoring the genesis of that output. How do those ideas actually get conceptualized in the first place?
You're talking about the nature of innovation. Deliberate, documented communication versus spontaneous communication.
Exactly. I argue that highly deliberate asynchronous communication actively kills organic brainstorming. Innovation rarely happens because someone scheduled a highly rigid 45-minute video call with a bulleted agenda. Innovation happens through friction. It happens in the margins. We talk about water cooler chats, which sounds like a cliche, I know, but neurologically, it's a proxy for colliding distinct contexts. Two people from completely different departments bump into each other in the hallway, exchange half-formed ideas, and realize they are holding different pieces of the exact same puzzle.
Hold on. I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because we are sacrificing the deep, independent execution of the majority just to engineer an occasional accidental breakthrough for the few.
I wouldn't call it accidental.
Let's look at the actual anatomy of these so-called organic interactions. What the office romanticizes as a magical water cooler chat is, for the person deep in a complex spreadsheet or writing complex code, a standard office interruption. Every time someone taps you on the shoulder for a spontaneous brainstorm, it costs you roughly 20 minutes of focus recovery time.
elevating spontaneous friction. You are actively degrading deliberate focus.
I think you're comparing asynchronous work to playing chess by mail, highly calculated, slow, precise, where everyone gets to think about their move in total isolation.
That sounds highly efficient.
But knowledge work is rarely chess. It's much more like a jazz band. It is messy, it involves real-time improvisation, and you have to play off each other's visual cues and mistakes. If everyone is in a permanent hyper-focus zone, executing flawlessly on their individual tasks in total silence, who is connecting the dots? The accidental breakthrough for the few is often what funds the paychecks for the many. It's the new product line, it's the critical pivot.
That's a beautiful analogy, the jazz band. Truly. But what if the work isn't jazz? What if we're building a suspension bridge or coding a secure financial backend? I don't want improvisational jazz in those moments. I want meticulous, uninterrupted engineering.
Fair point. But even engineers need to learn how to build the bridge from someone, and let's not brush past the passive mentorship aspect. If I am a 23-year-old new hire, remote work gives me a screen, a chat channel, and a list of tasks. The office gives me a career ecosystem. I learn how to be a professional by watching veterans navigate it in real time. I overhear a senior partner de-escalating a tense client on the phone. You cannot schedule that kind of passive mentorship asynchronously.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. Deliberate communication doesn't mean we abandon mentorship. It means we practice respectful mentorship. If a younger employee needs guidance, a remote culture forces senior leaders to actually schedule one-on-one time to actively mentor, rather than relying on the lazy assumption that the junior employee will just magically absorb knowledge by breathing the same conditioned air. We are replacing accidental reliance with intentional structure.
Intentional structure is great, but human beings are not algorithms. We do not only learn when we are formally scheduled to learn on a calendar invite. We learn by observation. Fluid, nonverbal communication is how humans have transmitted culture for millennia. You cannot put a dashboard metric on a junior designer overhearing an architect debate a concept. That nonverbal context, the pacing, the physical confidence, the tone of voice, is stripped entirely from a wiki page.
I will acknowledge that certain physical nuances are lost, but we have to look at what is gained in exchange. We're talking a lot about the company's output and the company's innovation, but we need to look at the human being in the middle of this. Who is actually bearing the psychological and financial cost of these work architectures?
Okay, let's talk about the human cost.
Because the remote model offers profound psychological safety, it isn't just about wearing sweatpants. Remote work reduces microaggressions and office politics, drastically boosting morale for diverse teams. The office isn't a neutral ecosystem. It is often a very rigid hierarchy of social dominance. Remote work neutralizes a lot of that toxic geography.
I certainly won't deny that toxic office politics exist, and escaping that is a relief for many. But permanent remote work introduces its own severe psychological costs that we are just beginning to understand. We are seeing documented epidemics of isolation and loneliness associated with permanent home setups.
Well,
The commute wasn't just a physical journey, it was a liminal space. It was a psychological airlock that allowed the brain to transition from home mode to work mode. When your office is your kitchen table, you never actually leave work. That lack of physical boundary is a massive contributor to evening burnout.
that's an interesting point about isolation. Though I would frame it differently. Is the social connection of the office sometimes an artificial community that forces workers to endure expensive city centers rather than empowering them to build authentic lives in affordable regions?
Artificial community?
Yes, the office forces you to socialize with the people sitting next to you, but remote work gives you the geographic flexibility to live near your actual family, your actual friends, and your chosen community. It returns your time to you. You aren't commuting 2 hours a day to fulfill a corporate quota for socialization. You can spend those 2 hours at a local park, in a civic organization, or with your children.
I understand that vision, I do. But we are assuming that everyone has a robust, localized community waiting for them outside of work. The reality is, for many adults, particularly young professionals or people who have relocated for a job, the office is their primary engine of social integration.
It fights the epidemic of modern loneliness. And beyond the psychology, there is a very real financial friction point here that gets ignored, the hidden cost center.
Which one?
Remote work quietly shifts utility, space, and infrastructure cost directly back to the employee. The company saves millions on commercial real estate, and the employee is left paying for the increased electricity, the enterprise-grade internet, and dedicating a room in their private home to the corporation.
That is a fair critique of how companies handle stipends. But let's talk about the real estate itself. You view the office as a social hub. I view it as an artificial constraint.
But the corporate real estate you dismiss is actually an incredible equalizer. It provides everyone, regardless of their personal socioeconomic living situation, with the same ergonomic chair, the same fast internet, the same multi-monitor setup, and the same climate-controlled environment. For many workers, especially those who aren't executives with large suburban homes, remote work means sitting on the edge of a bed in a shared, noisy apartment.
You make a great point about the physical equalization of the office space. It does serve as a standardized baseline, but I would argue the true equalizer is broader talent access. When a company is no longer constrained by a 30-mile commuting radius around an expensive metropolitan hub, they can hire top performers globally.
Sure, the talent pool grows.
Right. They can hire people with disabilities who find commuting physically taxing or exclusionary. They can hire single parents who need the flexibility to do a school run at 3 p.m. The remote model expands the labor market in a way that is fundamentally more inclusive. It judges you on what your brain produces, not on whether your body can easily navigate downtown transit.
Inclusive in hiring, perhaps, but is it inclusive in promotion and retention? If the trust model is entirely based on measurable output, the invisible labor of an organization gets entirely overlooked. I'm talking about the person who organizes the team, who boosts morale, who mentors quietly in the background.
The social glue.
Yes, they don't have a dashboard metric for prevented a junior colleague from quitting by taking them to coffee after a rough meeting. That is the social tissue of a company. When you reduce workers to pure output generators, you risk creating a highly transactional, easily disposable workforce. The office culture, with all its flaws, recognizes the humanity of the worker beyond their raw data output.
But again, I must push back. The humanity of the worker is exactly what the remote model protects by giving them autonomy over their own environment, their own time, and their own health. However, I think we have clearly outlined the deep, systemic realities of both extremes here. It's clear why this is the defining debate of modern work.
Absolutely.
To summarize my position, remote work optimizes for measurable output, deliberate focus, and individual psychological safety. It breaks the arbitrary link between physical presence and perceived value, eradicating the theater of work and granting workers incredible lifestyle flexibility while giving companies unprecedented access to a global talent pool.
And vital social connection. Physical proximity provides the necessary friction for spontaneous innovation and the shared reality required for deep, unified alignment. It also provides crucial structural boundaries, that psychological airlock between our professional and personal lives, preventing work from bleeding into every hour of the day.
And yet, looking at the data from our source material, there is a clear point of convergence. The vast majority of workers and organizational leaders don't actually want to live at either absolute pole. They view hybrid models as the ultimate synthesis.
Yes, the hybrid synthesis. But I think we have to be very careful here. The most forward-thinking teams don't just treat hybrid schedules as a strict, thoughtless mandate, like an arbitrary, everyone must be in the office Tuesday through Thursday rule. When you do that, you get the worst of both worlds. You force people to endure the 2-hour commute just to sit at a desk in the office and be on video calls all day with people in other regions. That breeds massive resentment.
Exactly. It's an architectural choice, not just a scheduling one. The success of the synthesis relies on highly intentional design. You use office days purely for the things the office is actually good for: structured collaborative workshops, complex strategic alignment, and team building. You go there for the jazz.
Right.
And then crucially, you leave the remote days entirely open for deep, independent execution. You stay home to do the focused engineering.
Flexibility of autonomy. But we have to acknowledge that executing a hybrid model perfectly is incredibly difficult.
Why do you think it fails so often?
Because it requires managing two entirely different work architectures simultaneously. You have to be world-class at asynchronous documented communication for the remote days, while also facilitating brilliant dynamic physical gatherings on the office days. Most companies are only good at one or the other. They try to hybridize, and they end up with a messy, exhausting middle ground.
It really does require an entirely new level of intentionality from leadership and from the workers themselves. The underlying tension between the desire for autonomy and the need for proximity isn't magically solved by hybrid work. It's just being actively, constantly navigated. Designing modern work architecture is profoundly complex, and it requires us to rethink what a good employee actually looks like.
It is. The friction will remain, and listeners will have to navigate this within their own organizations, balancing the needs of their specific industry, the unique culture of their team, and the individual human beings they work with. There is no one-size-fits-all algorithm here. There is so much more to explore in how human collaboration will evolve over the next decade.
Absolutely. We started this conversation talking about the old architecture of work, the idea that the physical container, the factory floor, or the fluorescent office was the sole definition of professional action. Now we've broken the container. The work is out in the world, in our living rooms, on our screens, and occasionally back in that shared physical space. We are no longer just blindly occupying the architecture of work. We are being forced to actively design it. Thank you for joining us on this exploration. Until next time, keep questioning the architecture around you.